English translation, 575th contact Thursday, the 5th of December 2013, 11:46 hours.
There you are, Ptaah, dear friend. Actually, I was not expecting you until later this afternoon, but it is fine with me that you are already here. So be welcome.
Greetings also to you, dear friend. As I am with Florina and Njana today to discuss some important things and also to clarify some things, I will of course come here right after you have called Florina at 10 o'clock hours to give me the suggestions for the title of the picture book that Bernadette has designed. If you can present me with the design as she did it, then of course I would like to comment on it.
But first I would like to hear your opinion on this bullshit article here. If you would like to read it.
Swiss UFO guru Billy Meyer wants to save the world.
Zurich, Billy Meyer has retired. But the ufologist continues to fight against the end of the world with petitions. Billy B. Meyer has been gathering his followers around him in Hinterschmidruti ZH since 1975. The Free Interest Group for Frontier and Human Sciences and Ufology Studies FIGU follows him because he is said to have had contact with extraterrestrials since he was 5 years old. The Pleiaren, as they call the aliens, would have a mission to teach the human beings. One of the topics is overpopulation, the drastic consequences of which Meyer has been warning about since the 1995S. He is now active again in precisely this area, on change. He gives detailed reasons for a petition to the UN for worldwide birth control. He himself does not want to comment on it. Bernadette Brand of the FIGU Chem Group says, whether it's a lack of water, space, or food, all the world's big problems are rooted in overpopulation. State-controlled birth control is the solution to avert a catastrophe, she says. This is also the opinion of the Pleiaren, who provide Meyer with annual figures on the Earth's population, collected by means of bioregistration. According to them, there are 1 billion more human beings than known. The petition has not yet met with much response. Only 673 persons have signed. According to Brand, however, FIGU alone has 400 active members. Sect expert Georg Otto Schmid doubts this. Meyer no longer has the appeal of the past. The number of publications has decreased, as has public attention.
Original newspaper article 20 Minuten Zurich, Monday the 11th of November 2013.
It is very unfortunate that the unneeded are allowed to express themselves publicly in such abusive articles.
They are adversaries who, in their insignificant smallness, think they are greater than they really are.
You call a spade a spade.
But the reaction of the human beings who read the nonsense was largely the opposite. They were answers that were published on the internet, because the whole thing was published on the internet as an even bigger scandal. The whole thing corresponds to today's smear journalism, which has nothing to do with the facts and reality, and which is also led accordingly by people who are not at all critical of the truth. I have included some of the good comments in the February special bulletin. Of 98 comments, only 15 were negative, and some were even ridiculous. But see this letter here from my childhood friend. He also commented on it and asked me to publish the whole thing in a bulletin, which I will do in the February special bulletin. There are still some spelling mistakes, but they do not diminish what is said.
Ptaah reads,
This is very gratifying what he is writing here. I can only advocate a publication. And what you say about the smear journalism, as you call this kind of journalism, I can only agree with you and add that the false and slanderous claims as well as the actions of this kind are unscrupulous and irresponsible as well as reprehensible and reveal the miserable character of the human beings.
Of course. Because the letter is truly worthy of being read by many people.
That is also my opinion, because what is written says a lot about you.
Then I want to turn on the computer now, because Bernadette's draft is still in there. Ah, yes, look here, this is it. What do you think?
Well, photo inventarium, I think, well,
Dear Eddie, I would like you to print this statement in one of your bulletins, because I find it primitive how they slander you in the newspapers and insult you as a UFO guru. I also think it is bad that all those who write about you in such stupid and disparaging ways always twist things around. And instead of telling the truth, they just spread lies and slander. I know that they usually do not even know you and do not have a clue who and how and what you really are and what you do and teach good and important things. So now I would like to ask you to print the following statement in a bulletin, because if I send it to the 20-minute newspaper, then the people there are too cowardly and will not publish it in their shameful paper. Statement on the 20-minute article from the 11th of November 2013. I am a simple and honest man, over 80 years old, and I also want to give my honest opinion on the smearing of Billy Meyer in the 20-minute magazine. I have known Eddie Meyer as a dear and good friend since he was only 6 years old. And here I want to say something that should make many people think who are maliciously conspiring against him. Since the 1960s, Eddie has also been known as Billy and Billy Edward Albert Meyer, and he is a good and honest human being who is also very helpful, and who neither cheats, forges, nor lies. When he was only 6 years old, just when I met him, the fact that he was a few years younger than I, he also helped me a lot in my childhood years and saved me from falling into alcohol and not becoming a criminal. My father was an alcoholic and often forced me to drink beer and cider with him until I was drunk, and my mother was a woman who was completely upset and could not help it if my father constantly beat me. We did not live in Bulak, where Eddie, Billy, lived, but in a small town. But I saw him very often because he was often on his own, and he also came to our town where I met him. Eddie used to take me to the surrounding woods to watch animals, then also to fish and swim in the Glat, or to roam the fields and meadows. That's how I got to know nature and to enjoy it. That's why I always went out on my own and learned a lot. And that's what I still do today, because I enjoy it so much. Eddie also told me about his friend who came from another world. And once I was also able to see the strange flying machine when Eddie was fetched by him. Eddie also taught me many things that I could always use well, and that I also used for my life, and I used it well. Especially important were his advices on how I should behave, and that it was very important that I had to think everything through carefully before I said or did anything. That saved me from a lot of misfortune, also towards my father. Eddie was a dear and good friend to me, even though he was still so small. He also knew a great deal, and actually he seemed to me like a big and dear and wise brother. And when my father died in a drunken stupor because he fell with his bicycle, my mother and I moved away, but I stayed in touch with Eddie, which is still the case today. We met again and again in our youth, and he also always helped me with good advice. Thanks to his help, I did not fall into alcohol or criminality, and with his wise advice, which was quite wise for his age, my mother also picked herself up and enjoyed life again. After her death, I moved to another place where I found work as a hired hand on the construction site. And with the help of the master builder, I was also able to do an apprenticeship as a bricklayer. I then married and worked as a bricklayer until my retirement. My son then showed me how to learn to write with a typewriter, and today I also know how to use a computer. But what I want to say now, because of the really stupid and childish article in the newspaper, 20 Minuten, and also the one on the internet, is that Eddie is not the author of the petition for a state-controlled birth regulation, but an Achim Wolf from Germany. He is also not the man he is portrayed as. Eddie told me that Wolf refers to the predictions published by Billy Edward Albert Meyer since the 1950s, which have also been sent repeatedly to governments, radio and television stations, and to world governments and various organizations since then, and continue to do so today. The petition is available on the internet at CHN. GILBSMBDH = birth regulation petition, and also a longer contribution by Eddie himself, which, however, was only added as a comment after the petition was called, as he told me. He also told me that he himself is the author of another important petition, one on the abolition of torture and the death penalty, which can also be found on the internet at. I must also say that Eddie, Billy, is neither a UFO guru nor a cult leader, as he is unfortunately disparaged by malicious people, envious liars, and by really stupid so-called cult experts, and by newspaper writers who always twist the truth and write things that are not true anyway, and by slanderers and other opponents. It is quite bad that a man like Eddie should be called names by such malicious people and be portrayed as a cheat, forger, and liar. All these people have no decency and are poor and inferior satellites in their dealings with the truth. And if they could cut off just a tiny bit of Eddie's qualities, they would be people who could be given real respect instead of the worst contempt. Who, how, and what Eddie really is can be read in 2 books distributed by Figu. There is probably no need to say more, because people like I have listed are too decent and above all stupid to see and understand the truth. E. Meyerhofer.
Original letter, page 1.
Bernadette came up with this title because we already have another book called Photobutch.
I did not really want to object to the main title, Photo Inventarium, but my well should actually express my agreement.
Then I have misinterpreted your well statement. Then the main title is okay. What is wrong with the subtitle and the other one?
This one, it is actually more than a subtitle. I want to design it differently, according to the actual presentation of the book's content. So it would be good if you could write a draft according to my formulation right away.
Of course I can do that, sure. Then let us hear it.
So the main title is Photo Inventarium. Below that, I would like the note, Standpunkte zur Person Billy Edward Albert Meyer. After that, a short distance should follow, and then everything else necessary should be placed in the middle of it, each time with the appropriate distance. Photos of the Pleiaren beam ships, land tracks and visitors, etc., photographed by Billy Edward Albert Meyer and from some of his witnesses May 1964 until... The date for the beginning of the photo shoot is not correct, because the first pictures were taken by you in India in the 1960s. In relation to the flying apparatus of Ascot.
I correct that. Then, according to your wish, the whole thing should be used in the way it is now recorded.
That is my wish, yes. But now, before we talk about anything else, I would like to talk about what was said at the last General Assembly on the 2nd of November about a possible abolition of the night watch services in the center. You know that Quetzal ordered this duty at the time to ensure the safety of the entire center and its residents. That is how Quetzal still sees it today, as do I and our board, and it is not expected to change. Even if the guards are doing their duty correctly, they are also unaware of the people who watch the center and its surroundings. Both near and far, such as in the nurseries, which I know you call Bungert, and on the footpath and beyond, who are often present to observe the center and what goes on around it. Sometimes there are also people among them who we consider to be unsure whether they could cause damage intentionally or maliciously, which is clear to us and has obviously been prevented several times by the presence of the night watchman. We believe that this will continue to be the case, and that the night watch services are also justified. Unfortunately, there are many Earth humans who, out of religious sectarianism as well as out of envious and wanton, malicious, and also other false justifications, come to you with bad intentions and are not afraid to harm you at the right time. So a lifting of the night watch services would be irresponsible.
You have told me this before, as well as Quetzal, so it is nothing new to me, which I also brought up at the last General Assembly. But what I said was obviously accepted.
I am aware of that, but I also wanted to make our view of the matter and the circumstances surrounding it officially clear.
I can understand that. But now something else. There was another climate conference, and as usual, nothing positive came out of it. Such conferences are sheer idiocy, because the real cause of climate destruction is not recognized and nothing is done about it. The whole problem of climate change and climate destruction can only be solved by a radical worldwide halt to births, so that overpopulation is drastically reduced. Consequently, appropriate measures would have to be taken in this regard, which would also reduce environmental destruction. Although this would not prevent the major disasters that are now imminent. As my predictions since the 1950s also clearly show, it could in future mitigate and in some cases even prevent even worse things from happening. But as long as the overpopulation continues to grow, the worse and more catastrophic the effects and destruction of the climate, nature and its fauna and flora and their extinction, as well as the damaging effects on the health of the human beings, who are increasingly affected by diseases and epidemics, often in fatal form. It is therefore up to governments and public authorities to take the correct steps, but it is also up to the human being as an individual. But it is also the family that is lacking, not only because having children is exaggerated, but also because the correct social attitude, etc., as well as a really good education, the humanity and the comprehensive responsibility are lost. This makes the family a breeding ground for all evils, criminality, and crime. Religious and sectarian beliefs also play a very important role, because they push the human beings away from the perception of reality and its truth, and lead them astray and to ruin. This is why the human beings also do not understand that it is not religious and sectarian faith, but only clear and effective knowledge that brings help, healing, and salvation. The times of revolutionary events, as they have been predicted again and again since the 1950s, have been coming for decades, and they are constantly increasing. All the natural catastrophes that are occurring on a massive scale are proof of the correct predictions, which nobody can seriously deny today. Nevertheless, there are know-it-alls, fools, and antagonists who ridicule everything and believe they know better. The stupidity of the human beings, and this unfortunately affects the majority of humanity, unfortunately knows no bounds. So they continue to muddle along in the old style of global destruction in every conceivable way, and the whole thing is not stopped. Thus the human beings of Earth rush into a dark and deadly doom and fall into one catastrophe after another, beaten and driven by the fist of their own irrationality and arrogance. They themselves are the giants who raise their own fist against themselves, cursing their own self-generated fate because they are deluded into believing that they are not to blame. But their own gigantic and avenging fist of their own unreasonableness and arrogance and their megalomania now demands an account from them, which they have to bear in a bad way, because they do not live according to the creational natural sense, according to its laws and recommendations, but only in lies and deceit, filled with hatred, greed, lust, and addiction, with murder, war, and other crimes and acts of violence. The human beings of the earth live their lives, but not in the sense of the creational natural laws and recommendations. They shamefully trample on true love and the goodness of life and all the laws of nature, while generosity, which is anchored in all creational natural things, accepted their diabolical actions for a very long time and gave them a last chance again and again. But everything was disregarded, and during all the last 6 decades, since the 1950s, during which predictions of positive change were repeatedly made, absolutely nothing good or positive was done to avoid all the predicted catastrophes and evils. As a result, overpopulation continued to increase drastically, and all this human irrationality destroyed nature and the climate, leading to more and more natural disasters, and also to an enormous increase in climate destruction, with scientists today trivializing only talking about climate change. This is despite the fact that climate destruction is taking place, and it is the fault of the human beings of the earth. Through all the catastrophic destruction caused by the irresponsible machinations of overpopulation against nature, its fauna and flora, and against the planet itself. The exploitation of the Earth's resources and the emission of enormous quantities of toxic substances and toxic gases, such as emissions from motor vehicles, aircraft and ships, play an incredibly important role, as do the burning of fossil fuels and the construction and concreting over and absolute exploitation of cultivated land, in addition to the industrial drying up of streams, rivers, lakes, and even seas, for example, to irrigate unnecessary flower farms or to flush out Earth resources, etc. Since the 1950s, the human beings of the Earth have had enough time to reflect on their true love and loyalty to nature and the planet, and on a population appropriate to the planet, in order to find their way back to the natural laws of creation. But every single chance was consciously, selfishly, or contemptuously disregarded and shamefully trampled into the dirt, because the human beings wanted to live their own lives and shift the responsibility from themselves. Thus they led their lives as they had done since ancient times, but from the 20th century onward to an increased and exuberant extent, in selfishness, lust, and greed, and thus a life of hatred, arrogance, lust for power and war and degeneration, while others fell into criminal or felonious machinations, far removed from the true creational natural laws and recommendations of life. But this has long been avenged also in the present and future time. The zenith of this has already passed, where everything could have been smoothed out and avoided by enormous natural, climatic, and planetary catastrophes. Because now the only thing that can be done is to prevent the worst, namely that the earthly humanity leads itself into a collapse by a further increasing overpopulation and largely destroys itself. This time is now really approaching, for already the first signs of this are emerging in many ways, even if this is not yet seen or does not want to be seen by the human beings of the earth, also not by those wise scientists who want to know everything and believe themselves to be very great. But the future will prove, even if it will be an even more distant future, that the predictions are based on truth. It will not only be diseases and epidemics that will play a part in the whole, but also misery and hatred, crime, war, lack of living space, land contamination, lack of drinking water, enormous natural, climatic, and planetary disasters, such as huge, destructive earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and many other things that affect the human being's life and make it impossible for many to even eke out an existence. But the earthly humanity does nothing to face this difficult and destructive time, because most people think highly up to the tip of their nose, because they are completely and solely focused on themselves, and only their personal good and woe is haunting them. The majority of the world's population finds it a senseless and useless waste to think about the earth, nature, its flora and fauna, and the climate. But this has been taking its revenge for decades, since overpopulation has become more and more prevalent and has already increased to 8.3 billion, 8,300 million. And it will continue to avenge itself more and more, right up to the decline of civilizations, and possibly the extermination and annihilation of most of humanity. So it must ask itself very quickly where it wants to go, whether into a better and more regulated future or into final doom. And since this concerns the whole mass of humanity, it also concerns every single human being. So the question of where to go is mainly addressed to the individual, for all the many individuals make up the humanity that lives on Earth, in a world of disharmony and unkindness, of hatred, jealousy and discord, and of selfishness, terror and wars, criminality and crime. How all these evil, bad, and negative degenerations in this horrendous measure, as everything is given today, never occurred in old times, but only came about through irresponsible overpopulation. The human being as an individual is mainly concerned with the question of where his irresponsible actions should lead in relation to the further increase of overpopulation. The intellect, reason, and responsibility of the individual are called for everyone contributes to the misery, distress, and destruction of planet Earth and its nature, fauna, and flora, and climate. Just the exploitation of the Earth's resources to produce fuels, plastics, and hundreds of articles of daily use in building materials and useless articles, which are produced as luxuries and goods for a high standard of living, creates enormous destruction and unmanageable mountains of rubbish and masses of deadly poisons and poisonous gases. Not only the human beings are poisoned by these, but also nature, its fauna and flora, vegetables, fruits, and all other food plants, as well as the waters, the atmosphere, the air we breathe, and food in general. And the fact that many diseases and epidemics arise from this. This is only one inevitable consequence, but it will lead hopelessly to ruin if the madness of overpopulation is not radically and quickly stopped. Cancer alone, which affects many millions of people throughout the world, made ill by the human being's own environmental toxins, which are released into the environment, and other toxins added to food, is already causing untold suffering to human beings. This, in addition to the financial costs caused by diseases and epidemics, which make the policyholders of health insurance companies stupidly pay for themselves. But there are also the heating systems, billions of times over, which run on fuel oil, for which the oil is extracted and refined for heating purposes. And there are also all the billions of cars used to transport people, as well as ships, aircraft, and goods transport vehicles, which emit huge quantities of toxic emissions into the air and pollute the environment. Nor should we forget the military vehicles and aircraft of all kinds, which depend on all the Earth's resources and with which wars are fought, bringing misery and hardship, death, destruction, and ruin to humanity on Earth, to nature and its flora and fauna, not to mention the fact that the Earth's climate and the planet are also being devastated. I have written about this many times since the 1950s, and have sent my predictions to governments, newspapers, journals, and radio stations, but there has been no response, and still no response. On the 16th of September 1964 in Kabul, Afghanistan, for example, I wrote an article and sent it out around the world, most of which I would like to attach here and then publish in a bulletin with what has already been said. You know what it was like, so I do not have to read it all out to you, but simply attach it to the report of the interview.
I am in agreement with that.
The article in question follows, but only that which is directly relevant and important in relation to overpopulation and its consequences will be discussed, with also a few changes to the text.
Article from the 16th of September, 1964.
Human being of the earth, you are wandering on the path of perdition, on the path of disharmony with nature and the creational natural laws. You are wandering on the path of death into a bottomless abyss, full of unbelievable horrors and deadly doom, lurking to tear you into its blood-soaked claws and to crush you mercilessly. The bony clawed fist of the avenging giant of foolishness and folly tears you out of your life and throws you into the maw of all-consuming destruction. The laws of creation and nature still give you one last effective chance. To save you, humanity, and you, the human being of this earth, from the agonizing end that is already bringing the upheaval of the present and the coming time. Human beings of the earth, you still have a really last chance to take the last chance you can to prevent the worst from happening. But remember that in a short time it will be too late, for afterwards there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, as it has been transmitted from time immemorial. And the harbingers of this new age, described over thousands of years, the catastrophes of all kinds already growing into the eerie, bear witness to the fact that the time has come for the prophecies to be fulfilled, and that the upheavals can no longer be stopped, but can only be mitigated in their worst forms. Thus, also, the traditional prophecies of the signs in the sky have become reality. For years these have been seen and observed at all hours of the day and night and in all countries, but unfortunately often misinterpreted and ridiculed. However, they are the signs of the times, such as fireballs, explosions of rays in the atmosphere, Earth electromagnetic atmospheric phenomena, strange clouds and hazy phenomena, which appear by the hundreds like small flying objects. But there also appear warning, knowing, wise and predictive human beings and proclaimers to bring the teaching of the truth, teaching of spirit, teaching of the life to the earthlings, so that they may enter into the conscious evolutionary process and into the consciousness evolutive action, the human being of the earth, with his still limited consciousness, forces the basic and structural elements of nature and life to react in order to destroy nature and myriad forms of life, and the climate of the earth in his madness. Therefore, I raise my voice, because I know the future, and cry out a warning to all the humanity of the earth, a warning based on past and present events that carry themselves in evil ways further into the future. The time has already come when the climatic conditions throughout the world are beginning to change drastically through the human being's fault, and this will also have an impact on the future with extreme storms of all kinds. Everything is already such that innumerable human lives, hundreds of thousands and millions, are and will continue to be lamented. The immense destruction of all human achievements is also expanding. Destruction of mountains by landslides due to the thawing of the permafrost, and by volcanism is blowing away large parts of mountains, which fall down into the valley as mudslides, destroying everything, destroying whole villages and towns, and costing many human lives. All over the world, glaciers are melting, as are the ice masses of the Arctic and Antarctic. The world's climate is rapidly warming, leading to tremendous climatic upheavals, with great heat and cold waves, conflagrations, droughts, floods, snow and hailstorms, increasingly frequent earthquakes and seaquakes, and the resulting violent tsunamis on the seas and lakes, causing further devastating destruction of human achievements and landscapes, and mass deaths of the human beings. There is enormous material damage to land, houses, and all kinds of buildings, roads, railways, torrents, streams, rivers, and lakes. And more human lives will have to be lamented by these climate-related upheavals and tremendous storms, because the rapid and increasing global warming and climate change is changing the whole of nature and the ocean currents, which cause enormous upheavals. The entire animal world is also changing, and many mutations are taking place in many animals as well as in the plant world and in the human being, with overpopulation being the main culprit. Overpopulation is the greatest evil on Earth, because the further and faster it grows, the greater, more extensive and unsolvable all the resulting problems become. These problems exist in all areas, including medicine, dwindling drinking water, the inexhaustible consumption of energy, and the ever-increasing global terrorism. In addition, there are the wars instigated by criminal state powers, as well as family tragedies, which are taking on ever more serious forms and are constantly multiplying. But the growing problems are also caused by air and water pollution and environmental degradation, by the rise in crime and criminality, as well as by the general weakening of the human being's health, consciousness, mind, and body. There is also the human being's blatantly increasing indifference towards his own and other people's lives, as well as the ever-increasing coldness and lack of interest in good interpersonal relationships. The lack of useful leisure activities is also one of the problems that can no longer be overcome, because instead of pursuing such activities, people are now only looking for and cultivating pleasure and idleness. This also inevitably increases the brutalization of the human being against his fellow human beings, nature and its fauna and flora. The human beings are becoming more and more susceptible to allergies and diseases affecting them, to degenerations of the sexual life, to psychic degenerations, to depression and suicides, to psychopathic and paranoid impulses from which murders and mass murders, as well as the mistreatment of fellow human beings result, which are more and more carried out by young people because their whole education fails completely in every respect. More and more cowardly human beings appear, who throw away their lives because they have become incapable of bearing pain and suffering, and end their lives by dying naturally. Quo vadis, humanitas? Humanity, where are you going? Human beings of the earth, you are creating havoc on the planet and on all life on an unimaginable scale. And the destruction you are causing in nature and in life is spreading throughout the world, causing enormous damage, destruction, and distress and misery. Torrents and streams become torrents, rivers become raging torrents, while wild waters burst their banks and cause tremendous floods, devastating all land, destroying countless human achievements and livelihoods, and, together with other disasters, cost hundreds of thousands and millions of human lives. There are also, as I have already mentioned, primeval volcanic eruptions, together with tremendously extreme earth and sea quakes, all of which make the disasters worse and worse, and ultimately cannot be stopped. In 1964, everything is still happening on a small scale, but from the 1970s onwards, everything will increase to such an extent in the coming decades that by the end of the 20th century, everything is already degenerating in an unusual way. But this in no way means the end of the worldwide catastrophes caused by human beings, because once the new millennium has arrived, nature will rebel even more vigorously against the environmentally destructive madness of the human beings of the earth, and will reach a level that equals the primeval times of the earth. If we look at and analyze the coming events and catastrophes that will befall the earth, the climate, and humanity, it is clear that it is the human being of the earth who is to blame for all of this. And this, as has already been explained, is the result of the unstoppable growth of overpopulation, from which all problems arise that can no longer be dealt with in a simple way, but only through radical and rigorous global laws and their observance. The blame for the coming calamity and chaos, as well as for the catastrophes, basically lies with the vast mass of humanity. Even if pathologically stupid and irresponsible know-it-alls and scientists claim the opposite. Overpopulation alone is the factor of all evils, both in terms of shortages of energy and drinking water, and also in terms of the destruction of nature and the environment and global warming. If an existing problem of this or any other type of overpopulation is tackled and a solution is found and implemented, then, during the period of implementation of the solution, the whole will be overtaken by new problems of the same or also different forms. Because during the period of implementation of the solution, the world's population or overpopulation will increase by hundreds of millions of human beings, which will render the solutions worked out null and void, and will be overtaken by similar new problems. Asylum seekers, neo-Nazi and extremist movements, migration, global terrorism, and new wars will also spread, creating discord, misery, and other major new problems. Against all the evils which emanate from the human beings of the earth, and which they have caused by the unreasonableness of the cultivated overpopulation on all life, nature, climate, atmosphere, waters, fauna, and flora, and on the whole planet itself, very harsh and drastic measures must be taken. These include measures against the world domination machinations of those state powers which criminally trigger wars and terror all over the world, which themselves carry out wars and acts of terror and plunge other countries into chaos, also wanting to trample on the mentality of the human beings and break and eradicate their religion and politics. Due to the rapid growth of humanity, it is forced to destroy the environment more and more frequently and to exploit and destroy the resources of the earth in order to meet the increasing needs of all kinds of humanity. But all these needs are increasing in mass with the growing number of humanity, which is causing more and more damage and destruction to nature, flora, and fauna, as well as to the climate and the entire environment. The planet itself is being tormented and slowly destroyed, as nuclear and other explosions disrupt the structure of the Earth and trigger earthquakes, seaquakes, and volcanic eruptions. Waters, nature, the atmosphere, and near-Earth space are polluted and poisoned, while the primeval forests are profitably destroyed and devastated. The recommendation of the hour and the future is to finally put a stop to the madness of overpopulation. Although this will no longer be able to stop the climate change caused by humanity, reason can somewhat curb the destruction, devastation, chaos, and catastrophes. For example, by restoring natural corridors and floodplains and stopping the overexploitation of the planet and of nature and its fauna and flora, because this is the only way to avoid the worst. This, however, requires that the madness of overpopulation be stopped by radical, far-reaching legal measures of a worldwide birth regulation. The overpopulation, or rather the world population, must be contained and reduced as a matter of urgency by means of a worldwide controlled birth control. Because only in this way can all the increasing needs of mankind of every kind and the further and increasing destruction associated with them ultimately be eliminated. A great deal has already been done to ensure that the predictions are fulfilled, which is why it is also necessary to take measures to counteract them. Pollution from fossil fuel engines of all kinds, as well as from vents, etc., must be curbed as a matter of urgency, along with all other forms of environmental and air pollution. It is also of the utmost urgency that all human constructions of any kind, such as dwellings and factories, etc., disappear from endangered avalanche and flood areas. Floodplain landscapes, etc., must be returned to nature as natural water catchment areas for flood water. Houses and factories, etc., may no longer be built along torrents, field streams, lake shores, in or on avalanche slopes, or water-prone plains and seas. In addition, extremely urgent precautions must be taken along streams, rivers, lakes, roads, residential areas, slopes and mountains, etc., by erecting very strong and high structures in vulnerable areas where wild water can flow over or where mud flows. Snow and mud, avalanches and landslides can occur and cause damage in order to protect houses, paths and railway lines from being washed away, flooded, buried or swept away. This will be necessary in many places because much of the predicted chaos and catastrophes will unfortunately already be inevitable, and time is running out. So action is called for, and this is the responsibility of all earthly humanity. The human beings of the earth must act before it is finally too late, and nothing more can be done at all to stop the irresponsibly triggered process of climate, fauna and flora, as well as the destruction of nature and the planet, and the extermination of mankind. Where are you going, humanity of this earth? Quo vadis, humanitas? You are erring on the path of darkness, on the path that leads to ruin without return. Save yourself, for it is still time for complete conversion, to walk on the path of light, the creational natural, on the path of light, of the truth of omnipresent creational natural laws, on the path of good itself. Human being, turn your back on your previous life and find your way back to the creational natural laws and recommendations. Find back to the real path of real life. But the path is not to be found and walked through religion or sectarianism. So it is not enough that you hurry to church daily or every Sunday to shine, that you are one of those who are diligent churchgoers, to hear the word of the Spirit at every opportunity, and if possible to sit next to him in the first row of seats, so that everyone can see you well, and see that you are diligently listening to the word of the God, who is imaginary in every case. It is of no use when you are so close to the clergyman, when you go to the mosque, the temple, the synagogue, or any house of prayer to pray, or that you do not miss a word of the representative of the religion who conducts the service. If you also break all creational natural laws and recommendations, ignore them shamefully and trample them underfoot. Human being of the earth, such action is not a law or recommendation of creational natural truth, nor is it creational natural order, nor is it the meaning of life. If you do not find the way of truth out of your own knowledge, and do not understand the word of truth deeply, do not trust it and do not obey it, then it is better for you to hide in the deepest puddle of shame. If you do not tread the path of reality and its truth, and thus of the creational natural laws and recommendations, then let at least those who want to tread it and search for the effective reality and truth find this path unchallenged. Do not curse and condemn the seekers of the truth, for their step and presence on the path of truth does not serve their own fame, not a shine like a beryl, but rather their evolution in consciousness, as is given to the human being by the creational natural laws as the meaning of life. In it is also anchored all human behavior in every respect, both in relation to fellow human beings, to being human, to nature, to fauna and flora, to the climate of the world, and to the planet itself. But if you contravene this, human being of the earth, your own punishment will overtake you before you know it, for the era of the coming events is advancing, leaving no time left to play with the further breeding of overpopulation and the destruction of the climate, as you have done so far as an individual human being and as a mass of humanity. For a long, far too long time, all the evils have been played with and played with shame. But now the masses are overflowing, for it has been said, since time immemorial, the jug goes to the well until it breaks. Mankind and human being, as individuals, whether rich or poor, small or large, beggar or worker, human being in every position, it concerns you. To you are my words. Turn around and walk the path of true life as determined by the non-religious and non-sectarian creational natural laws and recommendations, for only a short time is left when great disaster will come upon the world and upon you, and will demand account from you for all the destruction you have caused by overpopulation among mankind itself and to all nature, to fauna and flora, to the climate, to the atmosphere, as well as to all the waters and otherwise all around. In the writings of the millennia, it is written, "Love your neighbor as yourself, for he or she is your bodily brother or sister, the one who was given the breath of life." So, human being, stop all your hatred, your greed, the daily strife, the murderous wars, and all the selfishness. Love your neighbor as yourself, but also love nature, the fauna and flora, and the planet which is your home and your aegis. So it is written, respect the signs of the times which will be in the sky when the time is near for revolution to take place. Now, human beings as individuals, respect these signs of the times, learn to understand them, and do not misinterpret them. Know their truth and do not consider them as strange miracles, for a miracle is only a word as a concept, but its value has no meaning. Consider the signs for what they really are, namely, the product of a powerful creational natural law that you have broken through overpopulation and all the problems it has created. You have done this worldwide among all humanity, in nature, fauna, and flora, in climate, and in the planet itself. By doing so, you have caused tremendous changes and destruction to nature and climate, bringing misery, murder, crime, war, terror, misery, and ruin to the world. The signs in the sky are mainly signs of the effects of human unreasonableness, signs that reveal themselves as devastating and catastrophic storms of all kinds, as global warming and climate destruction and environmental degradation are forming into unimagined catastrophes. This is already part of everyday life, but you, the human being of the earth, have still not grasped it and have not understood that you yourself are to blame for all these evil events. To blame because you continue to increase overpopulation and thereby create ever more enormous, unsolvable problems which you can no longer cope with. So, turn back before it is too late, because there is still something you can do to avoid the greatest catastrophes. But act quickly, because otherwise it will already be too late in 20 years from 1984, because then the catastrophic effects of your wicked actions can no longer be stopped, and nature, life, the planet and the climate will let the consequences of human irrationality burst upon mankind and the planet with primeval violence. Human beings of this earth, you still have one last chance, a short deadline. But remember, only a short time will be left for this deadline to roll over this world before my words prove to be truth. Words of prediction, which will soon be rounded off if you continue in your traditional style. But then it will be too late for you and for the mass of humanity, to whom I ask the question, Quo vadis, humanitas? At the end of the 20-year period I have mentioned from 1984 onwards, the process of destruction of climate and nature will be unstoppable unless overpopulation is drastically reduced by a radical birth stop, thereby alleviating all problems until one far-off day they disappear for good. If this does not happen, the problems of all kinds will increase immeasurably and can no longer be overcome. But in this way, the existence of the whole of humanity and the planet will be put at risk and called into question. And consequently, it is possible that one day earthly humanity will erase and destroy itself through its unreasonableness and through its stupidity and selfishness. And there will not be a God who will open an ear to humanity to answer a plea for forgiveness and the prevention of evil. Because where there is no God, no one can hear anything, and no one can bring help either. Basically, you, the human being of the earth, are your own master and Lord alone. For you alone are God, and therefore you bear full responsibility for all your actions and work, for all your thoughts and feelings, and for your entire destiny, of which you are the forger. Kabul, Afghanistan, the 16th of September 1964, Simyatse Silver Star Center, 2013, Billy.
I can only agree with what you said before as well as with what you wrote and distributed in 1964, but did not receive any reactions to it. Unfortunately, then as now, a simple human being without an academic title is not listened to, even though the human being is more knowledgeable and wiser than the title holders. But Earth humans will certainly remember your warnings, predictions, and words one day, but unfortunately only when nothing more can be saved.
That may well be. Unfortunately, there are still many know-it-alls and adversaries today who do not care about reality and truth, but make horrendous money out of everything that depends on the masses of overpopulation with deals and lies.
Which is actually the case. Then I want to discuss some things with you now which are important, and in addition, I also want to talk to you in a private way.
Naturally, that is no problem.